Today I'd like to talk about some basic skills in Adobe Illustrator for drawing things like logos, but also you can of course draw anything else that you feel like illustrating because it's called Illustrator. So let's see if we can illustrate some basic ideas. First of all, this is the startup menu here. Mac and PC look a little different, but basically the idea is the same, that you can start a new document, and there are some presets here for like mobile or print or web. Print is a good one because we do a lot of printing, okay? But you know, this for us, I was using a 12 by 12 size, and that is fine. Now, the reason it doesn't matter a whole lot is because Illustrator files can be kind of scaled infinitely if they are all using the Illustrator vector drawing tools. But 12 by 12 is not bad in case you happen to use a picture file inside this. Sometimes we do that for materials and things like that. So anyway, 12 by 12 is fine. And I'll click Create. Note, by the way, that there are inches, millimeters, picas, and if you can have orientation that's different. And you can also have more than one artboard, which we'll talk about later. Those are handy if you know you're going to have a couple of variations of the same idea. So I'll click Create. And you end up with what looks like a big blank sheet of paper. So let's do a quick kind of review of the interface here. First of all, I think I might have mentioned in class, I use this Essentials Classic view, partly just because I like to see the buttons out there in front of me. But you can choose any which way you want, and I know that some people with smaller screens are going to want something with a little less clutter. People with multiple screens can have all the clutter they want, or they can relegate certain pieces off to the other screen. Basically, you have toolbar over here, which can be collapsed into a single line or spread into a double line by just clicking the arrow keys right here. You have kind of the, I don't know what you'd call it, the status bar up here that varies based on the tool that you have. You have your handy-dandy pull-down menus, which, as in all our other programs, they repeat tools that are in the toolbars. Then here you have kind of an information palette. The one that's up is called Properties, which is very AutoCAD-y. Again, that's kind of why I like to have it up visible. And then you'll see these different palettes for different sorts of things. Color, you might imagine, is good for picking color. Swatches is for more complicated textures. Brushes is for what essentially are strokes, which we'll learn about. And again, many different things. Okay, and it depends what's selected on your screen that will make it visible. Now, a keyboard shortcut for zooming in and out is Command plus or minus, and that zooms you in or out, or Control plus or minus, and that allows you to quickly zoom in. Scrolling moves you up and down. There are also these little scroll bars here, which allow you to zip around the screen. All right, and so that's the basics of the interface. So here we are in a blank file, and there are a couple of different pieces to your typical Adobe Illustrator file. What I'll do, I'll just use an example of a typical kind of project to illustrate those. The things that you see, there are basically images, like photographs that you can cull from wherever. There's bits of text, which is a little different, so I give it its own category. And then you basically have drawings, the kind of illustration part of the drawing, vector drawing. And for that, there's actually three parts to a vector drawing. There are the paths, and the paths are kind of the sketched route that you want some line to take. And then to that line, you can apply a stroke. A stroke is basically, it's easy to think of it as a line weight and a line type, like you might see in AutoCAD or Revit. And then fill. Fill is basically the paint bucket pattern. So if you have a shape, whatever that shape, if it encloses some volume on the paper, you can fill it with a color or a pattern. Okay. So let's start here by just putting in an image file. And I thought what I'd do is do a kind of diagram for you. So let's take a look at your typical diagram. Obviously, you need some kind of concept. My concept is going to be cute little bunny rabbits. Aren't they so cute? And just as a reminder, those of you who may not remember, PNG files is a great search technique, because when you search for image files that use PNG, there will be a white area surrounding whatever image it is, typically, and that area will be invisible. It'll be clear. Okay, and that's because PNGs have something called an alpha channel. Make a note of that. Alpha channels are very useful. So anyway, here's a nice rabbit. You can see the PNG alpha channel is showing up black in my browser. You can save that image somewhere onto your computer. I'll just put it on the, where will I put it? I'll put it on the desktop, because that's probably the only place I'll remember where it is. Save that little puppy. I guess he's not a puppy, he's a rabbit. All right, and let's go back to good old Illustrator, and we will put him in the file. And again, as a reminder, you don't just insert things in Illustrator, you do what's called placing them. Okay, do place, browse, and hope that you can remember where you put the image. Oh, there it is. Oh, joy. Okay, and again, as a refresher, if you show import options, it will give you some options for size. Okay, in this case, it'll give you options for size if it's an AutoCAD file. In our case, we're just going to place the rabbit. I'll just put him over here. Okay, and he's a very nice, cute little rabbit. And when you place the object, there are grips or adjuster buttons here, hot corners, whatever you want to call them, that allow you to make changes to the image. Okay, Command or Control Z gets you undo, just like in other programs. Okay, so you can resize. If you don't hold down Shift, it will cause distortion. So hold down Shift. And what you'll also see here in the properties off to the right, there are a number of different things. You can crop the image, you can mask it, you can arrange it, which is to say bring it forward or backwards. Okay, and you can also lower its opacity. So if you're going to be having a bunch of lines and arrows pointing at stuff, that's awfully handy. Okay, and in typical of your concept kind of deconstruction, you're probably going to want to point at a few things and make a note about them. Okay, so we'll make a note about the rabbit's cute little fur. Okay, so first of all, the text tool, guess what? It looks like a T for text. Okay, pretty straightforward. You can even type in the letter T for text. And like a lot of programs, you just draw a box. Photoshop will fill in text for you, but you can also type whatever you want. We'll call it soft brown fur. How about that? There we go. You can also select the text here, and there are a number of options that show up in the properties menu, including the size. Okay. You should be aware of the size sheet that you're on. This is obviously a pretty big sheet. I will also have people not do text on Illustrator if they know that this is going to head to some other printed board somewhere. They'll do the text in, say, InDesign or Photoshop. Doing all your text in one place is a good idea. If you know this won't get resized at all, it's fine to put the text in here. Just be aware of the size of the font and make sure it's going to work on the paper that you're doing. Now, one thing that I like about text here in Illustrator, it's really flexible. For example, if we take this shape, it comes in a box. If you rotate the box, it automatically kind of scrolls to fit the box, however big it is, which is awfully nice. You can also draw the text in any shape. Here, let me just delete that. And I'll draw, oh, I don't know, we'll just draw a star or something like that. There's our nice star. Let me just move it over here. And then there is a text tool that allows you to fill a piece of whatever type of drawing, as long as it's defines some kind of area. So I'll click on this path, and you see the text that I had copied to the clipboard shows up in here. And it's text. You know, you can come back in here with your text tool and edit the text later on. Okay, I'll come back to the text tool, come in here, and you can make whatever changes are needed. Okay, and continue to type. And of course, it will continue to scroll. It will not resize, however. So if you type and there's too much type, you'll end up basically scrolling past the edge of the box. Okay, there are a lot of different text tools. You can do vertical type. You can do vertical type in a box. You can even do vertical type and regular type along a path. And let me show you how that works, just because it's so fun. I don't know. Maybe it's not fun for everybody, but it's fun for me. First of all, to draw paths, there are a couple basic tools. The one you're probably going to use the most is either a pen tool or the curvature tool. Okay, and they're actually the same tool, just slightly different. The pen tool, I'll just click on the pen tool. You can just click on points and it will draw a path. I'll just hit escape to finish it. That connects those points. It automatically fills that path with whatever the current foreground color is. You see here the fill color is black. So if I had changed that black color to red or whatever, it would change the fill of this selected object to red. By the way, you can also double click on that and pick multiple types of colors available in the swatches menu. We'll get to that a little later. Anyway, if you are just not feeling the whole color thing on your path, up here, when you select a path using this selection tool, which by the way looks suspiciously like the SketchUp and Revit selection tools, easy to remember. You'll see up here it says, oh, you've got a path and here are your color options. This is kind of the quick way to pick colors. This box with a slash, that means no color. Okay. You'll notice here, by the way, right next to it, this is the stroke color. The stroke is basically, that's another way to say line weight or line. Okay. If I change that from what had been nothing to green, you see how it turns green. And I can select this and make it a little darker so you can see it a little better. Well, that's not even all that dark. There we go. Nice and dark. Okay, so that is your pen tool. And again, you've got stroke and fill. Right now, I don't have any fill at all. And by the way, these paths, if you click on the direct selection tool, what you'll find, I'm just going to zoom in on this guy, is that there are little anchor points that are blue that you can double click on and edit the path after you've kind of created it. And that's kind of nice if you want to make an adjustment of some sort. Okay. Now, the whole point of this was to show you the text on a line tool. So let's go here and we'll go type on a path, click on the path, and it will fill the path from that point on with whatever text you had selected and copied to the clipboard, or it will fill in its own text if you didn't have it happening. And you might say, well, that's so cool. What else can it do? Well, what else it can do is if you come back in and use the direct selection tool and change the path, the text bends with it. Okay, so pretty fun stuff, and you can create some pretty interesting things. In fact, while I'm doing it, I can never resist showing off some of the fun things that this can do. You can also select a piece of text and choose Create Outlines. And what that does is it converts the text into paths. So each letter, here I can come in with the direct selection tool, each letter can now kind of be fiddled around with. This is great if you want to create, I don't know, some kind of funky title block with some weird unique text that's all yours. Okay, each of these becomes its own little piece, and you can also come in and fiddle around with the stroke, the fill and the stroke to be whatever cool effect that you want. Okay, and that's a lot harder to do if you haven't created it as paths. Now the only trick here, Now, anything we do to this, it's no longer text. So if I happen to, you know, mess around with it, it's just paths. It will not, there's no way to come back and edit it. So anyway, there you go. Fun with text. And in my mind, Illustrator is superior when it comes to text. So if you want to do something really funky and cool, Illustrator's the way to go with text. Anyway, okay, so there you go. So you might say, hey, didn't you want to put in an arrow? I do. And I like curvy arrows, and I'm going to use the curvature tool to do that. And it works just like the line tool. You click and define these anchor points. Oh, I should have made my fill pattern empty here. Let me select this, make my fill pattern empty, make my line color. What do we feel like today? Green. Let's make it green, and let's make it nice and heavy. Okay. So that's how you draw curvy lines. These work the same way as the paths that we saw earlier, except for one important difference. When you select these anchor points, I'll just drag this around, each one has what's called a bezier handle. The bezier bit has to do with curves. As you stretch out these handles, you can get all sorts of funky effects on the curves. Okay, and the dirty little secret, actually, by the way, if you're using the pen tool, if you click, you get straight lines. If you click and drag, you get these Bezier points. So if you're undecided as to whether or not you want straight or curvy lines, the pen tool is probably the way to go. Okay. All right. So anyway, you might say, here we go. Here's my note. Here's my funky text pointing. Why don't I have an arrow? Wouldn't that be awesome to have an arrow? So to get an arrow, you need to modify the properties of the arrow. We need to go to the stroke menu. Okay, it looks like a bunch of stacked lines. I'll click on that. Some people may not see all the options. It might just say the height there, or the line weight. If you don't see the options, I believe the PC, it does not show them automatically. Just click on the little sub menu option here in the upper right, and it will show them. And there's quite a few options here. First of all, arrowheads is where we want. You can have one at the start and one at the end. And there are actually a lot of fun arrows in here. Oh, except I got that one on the wrong end here. Let's go and go down to the other end. Sometimes that happens. I don't know why it happens. So there's my arrowheads, and you can change the size. It's based on a percentage. Okay, so whoops. So you can make it bigger or smaller that way. There's different ways that you can align the arrow with the path. Okay, so if you want the arrowhead to go past the end of the path, you click that one. Or if you want it to just hit at the end of the path. These are obviously tweaks, which are maybe a little more subtle than we need. You can even dash the line if you want. And you can type in fact, you can have different dashed spacings here if you want. And it will create dash dots or other sorts of fun things. So anyway, there's all sorts of fun things that you can do with lines that make it really interesting. Anyway, what I like to do, once I have an arrow and a piece of text that I like, I will use Shift to select them both. I have the using the selection tool, and then I just Alt drag. So if you hold down the Alt key, see how my cursor, I know it's a little small. See if we can, well, we can't zoom in and see it at the same time. My cursor gives me the I'm going to make a copy button. I can just click and drag. And if I hold down Shift, it makes the copy in exactly the same location. And now the copy, I can point at the, I can grab, oh, I don't know, the endpoint here. And well, now this text I can't edit, but in theory I could say, you know, like lucky rabbit's foot or something like that. Well, I guess they're not so lucky for the poor rabbit. Okay, so anyway, there you go. There is the basics of texts, adding text and images, creating a diagram. And again, if you feel like your colors are not showing up so great, you can wash out the image a little bit or use photo editing techniques on it. Okay, so let's get on with doing some more drawing. What I like to do sometimes, especially if I feel like I'm experimenting, I don't know exactly how I want this to come out. I'll make a couple of blank sheets to put stuff on, to do my drawings on. Those sheets are called artboards, and I'm just going to click on this artboard palette here, and it's a little hard to see, but down at the bottom there is a create a new artboard button. Okay, and what it will do, let me just zoom out a little, you can see that it has basically created a copy of the original. Each of these artboards has its own unique size, which you can come and customize if you had some special application or you wanted to view it in a certain format. Okay, and there's as far as I know, I don't know what the limit is on artboards. You can have as many as you want. But the reason people like them is because let's say I'm working on this drawing and I want to make a slight variation. I can copy assets over from one to the other very easily. So let's say you're working on interior elevations. You can drag materials or furnishings or scale figures from one to the other, and it'll look consistent. So anyway, all right, let's zoom in here, and we'll do a little bit of drawing to talk about a few things. First of all, if you, like I mentioned, there are basic drawing techniques for drawing paths, and there are also ways to get very basic shapes, okay? Each of these have the same basic feature. Don't think of this as a shape, think of it as a path with a fill and a stroke. You see how it says fill and stroke over here? And again, like I've done with the top menu, I can do on the side menu, I can change the stroke color to whatever I want, or I can make it some funky rainbow, and I can change the line weight. Okay, so as you come and you have your idea for your logo, you'll definitely want to have the different kinds of the logo handy so you can draw the different kinds of lines that you need. Okay. Strokes, by the way, you might say, well, those strokes, I don't like those strokes. I want different strokes. It's very easy to get additional strokes. Illustrator has what's called a brushes menu. I'll just click on that over here, and it looks suspiciously like a glass with brushes. It has the strokes currently loaded into the project. In fact, let me just give this a come back here and go back to your basic stroke with black. Might be a little easier to illustrate some of these strokes. And the basic ones that are in the project, one's kind of a sketchy looking one, one's kind of a fuzzy, brushy kind of looking one. If you look up at the top of your screen or over on the properties palette, those are the same strokes that are available in the brushes menu. Each of these can be adjusted, by the way. They can be changed in their size. So one stroke may have a very different look if you force it to have overlaps versus just having a more of a linear effect. If you're still not satisfied, my goodness, you're just never satisfied. Let's come over here and see if we can find even more options for you. And in fact, yes, there are more options. There are all sorts of different types of brushes that come with the program on its own. Let me choose watercolor. They're very nice. I'll stretch this out, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of different watercolor options. They're all here under this library button. So if you can see, let me see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. Looks just like a bunch of books leaning together. If you click and drag on that, there's all sorts of different ones. And you can load some in too. You can go to the internet and they have all sorts of free ones and paid ones if you're so inclined. Anyway, each of these operates the same way. You take a path and you apply this stroke to that path, and then there are options for how it's going to behave. And of course, each one is going to look different depending on sort of how you set it up and what type of stroke it's applied to. So you'll have to experiment to find a stroke that you like. Okay. This is also true for fill patterns. Let me go back to a basic line type here. Here's my lovely, lovely shape. And let's say I want more fill patterns. I'm going to want to go to this swatches menu. And the swatches menu you can also import stuff from, say, Pantone. And there are a lot of different options in here, but there are some basic libraries. Obviously, let's see, let's go with Baroque. Some of these are Russian poster art. Never noticed that one before. What they are is they use colors that are typical of whatever it is that grouping is. So if you're familiar with Russian art at all, Russian poster art, use these sort of very primary colors. And you can actually kind of scroll through these and you'll see that there's all sorts of different ones. And you can create your own depending on the system that you're using in your project that makes sense. Let's see. There are also patterns here. For example, dots. We can make this into dots, and that's kind of a cool thing because you can create some interesting effects, and they are semi-transparent. Here, let me make a copy of this and make the copy have yellow, and then I will right-click on it and arrange it and send it to the back. And what you'll see is yellow on top of the dots, or the dots on top of the yellow. Okay. There also is a way to create, within a single swatch, you can create compounds, probably a little more than we need to learn at this particular stage. But anyway, so there you go. That's how you can create different fill patterns and different stroke patterns. Now, the last thing, and I'll show you this, just sometimes you have something and it's just a little hard to draw. You know, we're all limited by our drawing skill. One thing you can do is import an image that's close. I'm going to place a silhouette of a rabbit here. I'll just place it in my project. You know, that would take me a lot of time to draw, but maybe I just want that rabbit, but I want it in, you know, yellow polka dots like I had before or something like that. Illustrator allows you to trace images and basically convert this image into a path, which you can then add, fiddle around with the stroke and the fill pattern. The way you do that, you go to the window menu and you choose image trace. Now, some of you might be saying, hey, didn't you notice this image trace button up here? Or over here, if you have the image selected, there's one over here. I like to have the full menu. And you'll see in a minute why that is. Basically, I like to be able to see all the options here. There are a whole bunch of advanced options that as I'm creating the image trace, it helps me to see what I'm getting. Anyway, there are a number of preset ways that it can trace the image. You can see here some are color, some are black and white logo. Hey, we're working on one of those. But silhouette is what I've got here. So I'm going to try that. And when I select it, what you'll see is that it's going to try to figure out where the edges of this image are, and then it's going to try to trace it, basically. Okay. Now, what I'll do, I'm going to lower the threshold, and let's see if it works. Well, we don't. It doesn't smooth it out a little bit. Let's go with fewer corners and less noise. That will round out the edges as I do that. Now, if you have a pattern which doesn't have quite so many edges, if it's more whatever smooth or rectilinear, that's fine. If you want something that's a little more precise, then you're going to want to add particularly the paths and the corners. This actually doesn't have all that much detail to it, so we're not going to get a whole lot more by dragging this thing. The only thing it will do, by the way, is take a lot more computing time if you have a complex image. So don't try and trace, you know, like a mandala might take a long time if you add in all of these. Anyway, finally, you can create fills and strokes. I think I'm going to just turn off the fills. Well, actually, maybe I better leave it on because we won't see it otherwise. You can turn it off, and you can set the dimension of the pixel dimension of the stroke that's added, how precisely it kind of looks. Again, if you lower that number, it's going to take longer. And what you'll see is that this is no longer a picture. It is now a path with a fill and a stroke. Here, I'll make this invisible, and we'll make the stroke black. Okay, and we'll make it some fuzzy line type, just for the heck of it. Okay, well, that doesn't look so good. Where's that other one? There we go. That one will look pretty good. Make it a little smaller. Okay, so now I have control over this image, and I can come in and I can always add some. Here, we'll make it a light gray bunny rabbit, or a yellow bunny rabbit, or a green one. So you can see you have the option to kind of basically take as a base somebody else's image and fiddle around with it on your own. And that is the basics of creating a logo. So, all right, now you've done it. You've learned about strokes and paths and fills and all this kind of stuff. How do we get this image to whomever we need to get it to? There are two ways. A PDF file is what I prefer in our class because it works really well with Canvas. So what you'll want to do for that is you'll want to save your document first, then do a save as, and it can save it as a PDF file. Okay, just make sure you save the original Illustrator file first, or else you won't be able to come back and edit this little thing. If you need an image file for, say, printing, or you want to drag it into Photoshop, actually Photoshop, I believe you can open an Illustrator file, but anyway, for that you're going to want to export as. Okay, so File, Export As, and just choose the file format that you like. PNG, by the way, if you want to use this logo on your boards and you want background color to kind of work its way around the edges of the logo, make sure you choose PNG. It has that alpha channel that I so love. Otherwise, note that you can save this as an AutoCAD file. So if you always wanted to have a rabbit in your AutoCAD project, you can image trace it. You'll get a path, which you can then export as an AutoCAD file. And all of a sudden, it's in your AutoCAD project. Loads of fun, lots of time can be wasted. Anyway, finally, JPEG is a compressed file format, which is very handy. Also, TIFF is an uncompressed file format, probably not necessary when you're working with an Illustrator file. So there you go.